teachings of the 6 disciples that Jesus chose. So, if you remember, the last time I think I did a video was on my battle commander coming to me and saying, you've only got 6 weeks left. So good news, 1 week down, only got 5 weeks left now. Whatever that means, I don't know yet. No one's told me, but whatever it means. So I was really shocked. You know, when I read my battle commander has a pen name. So he was put in charge of recording literally every single word, movement, actions. He had an ongoing recording by writing it down of the entire life of Jesus. And so very different from the religious narrative. So you guys can believe the religious narrative, or you can believe one of his angels. I'm going to go with one of his angels since it's my battle commander. I don't find that to be a coincidence that I was led to get his book. Now, I've been 4 days solid. I'm talking 14 hours a day. I have not stopped. I've barely eaten. I have not stopped reading what his pen name is, Joshua, what he wrote on the life of Jesus. And what he wrote on the life of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, I got to hear all of the question and answer, I guess I would say, deep into the night. I mean, the questions and the answers, the teachings of Jesus, before I get started with the content, once I get started with the content, it's verbatim. I don't add or take away. Well, I should say, I'm not adding anything. I'm not giving it all to you because it's just too much. It's overwhelming. But his teachings, the profound teachings of Jesus, the Bible has been so edited as to be insanely different. The Christian church has it all wrong. Well, every church, every religion has it all wrong. Jesus wanted nothing to do with religions. So I'm just giving you a little, red flag. If this is going to trigger you, there's no reason to leave the Bible behind. I'm not saying that whatsoever. What I am saying is it was deeply edited to focus on Paul and to take away the actual message of Jesus. And it was very difficult. Jesus had a very hard time teaching he never called them disciples. He called them apostles from day one. And he only chose 6. And then those 6 apostles each of them got to choose one more. There was also 12 apostles that were all women. And there was, in the end, before Jesus' resurrection, there was 70 apostles, actually. So, again, I've got at this point, I think I've got around 10 videos already copied and pasted from the writings of Joshua. While I read every single one of them, I just wanted to give you my, brief overview. The message of Jesus was profoundly intimate about the kingdom within you. He only had one message, the kingdom within you. Yes, all of the parables were recorded. And yes, the parables are much more, extensive than what the Bible is very edited. That's what I can tell you. It's extremely edited. But it really is. And the parables were meant for different groups, depending on where he was, their indoctrination. Parables were meant for what he understood the minds of men. Once you go through the life and the teachings of Jesus, not the abroad teachings. I'm going to wait on that. He had different teachings than he had in Jerusalem or throughout Israel. So I'm going to save that for later. So right now I'm only going to go through him teaching the apostles, him teaching others on the parables, and basically it's a whole lot of question and answer between his apostles and him, because his apostles are heavily indoctrinated into multiple generations of the Torah, and so he's constantly correcting. So it's interesting, to say the least. Let me just get started. So you're hearing this. A lot of it's commentary from Joshua on what, a lot of it is verbatim what Jesus is saying to his apostles. And then at times you'll hear commentary from Joshua's observation of what's happening. Because Joshua understands, as he puts it, the mind of God and the mind of Jesus separately and combined. And he's understanding, and he's recording the frustration that Jesus has with the indoctrinated apostles. So Jesus has to try and pull them out of the old teaching and their understanding of Torah and scriptures in general and update them. So he is bringing a new teaching, but at the heart, it's about you're a son of God. You have been from day one. You are not born in sin. So that's the major indoctrination, that you're born in sin. You are not, and your sin is immediately forgiven by God, for he is within you, and he understands the nature of mankind. Different from his angels, who would not walk away from the light. But he allows angels to walk away from the light. Okay, now in Joshua's words. Just before noon on Saturday, January 12, AD 27, Jesus calls the apostles together for their ordination as public preachers of the gospel of the kingdom. They were expecting to be called almost any day. So this morning, they did not go out far from the shore to fish. Several of them were lingering near the shore, repairing their nets and tinkering with the fishing paraphernalia. As Jesus started down the seashore calling the apostles, he hailed Andrew and Peter, who were fishing near the shore. Next, he signaled to James and John, who were in a boat nearby, visiting with their father Zebedee and mending their nets. 2 by 2, he gathered up the other apostles, and when he assembled all 12, he journeyed with them to the highlands north of Capernaum. Now, what I'm leaving out here is Jesus only chose 6, and right away he told those 6, each of those 6, to go choose one other. So now we're coming together for the first time, the 12, but Jesus only chose 6. Highlands north of Capernaum, where he proceeded to instruct them in preparation for their formal ordination. For once all 12 of the apostles were silent, even Peter was in a reflective mood. At last the long-awaited 4-hour had come. The long-awaited 4-hour had come. They were going apart with the master to participate in some sort of solemn ceremony of personal consecration and collective dedication to the sacred work of representing their master in the proclamation of the coming of his Father's kingdom. The next day, Sunday, June 23rd, AD 27, Jesus imparted his final instructions to the 6. He directed them to go forth 2 and 2 to teach the glad tidings of the kingdom. He forbade them to baptize and advised against public preaching. Now, you guys are not going to like this. I'm just a trigger warning. Jesus always talked about baptism by the Spirit, not of water. So, to those with that indoctrination, that is John the Baptist teaching and not Jesus. We have to separate John the Baptist from Jesus. I'm just giving you a little trigger warning. That's coming up. I don't know if it's in this video, but it's the whole thing. Jesus only baptizes with Holy Spirit. Jesus imparted his final instructions to the 6. He directed them to go forth 2 and 2 to teach the glad tidings of the kingdom. He forbade them to baptize and advised against public preaching. He went on to explain that later he would permit them to preach in public, but that for a season and for many reasons, he desired them to acquire practical experience in dealing personally with their fellow men. Jesus purposed to make their first tour entirely one of personal work. Although this announcement was something of a disappointment to the apostles, still they saw, at least in part, Jesus' reason for thus beginning the proclamation of the kingdom. And they started out in good heart and with confident enthusiasm. He sent them forth by twos, James and John going to Charissa, Andrew and Peter to Capernaum, Philip and Nathanael went to Tarshish. Side note, there are many pages of reading on choosing the next 6 apostles and the teachings to them. I will skip all of that for sake of time. We all know that eventually there's 12 apostles before the women get involved and before other people get involved. Okay. Now, let's go start. Now we begin with Jesus's instructions to the 12. Jesus had a perfect grasp of the situation. He possessed unlimited power, which might have been utilized in the furtherance of his mission, but he was wholly content with means and personalities which most people would have regarded as inadequate and would have looked upon as insignificant. He was engaged in a mission of enormous dramatic possibilities, but he insisted on going about his Father's business in the most quiet and underdramatic manner. He studiously avoided all displays of power, and he now planned to work quietly, at least for several months, with his 12 apostles around about the Sea of Galilee. Jesus had planned for a quiet missionary campaign of 5 months, personal work. He did not tell the apostles how long this was to last. They worked from week to week, and early on this first day of the week, just as he was about to announce to his 12 apostles, Simon, Peter, James, Zebedee, and Judas Iscariot came to have private converse with him. Taking Jesus aside, Peter made bold to say, "Master, we come at the behest of our associates to inquire whether the time is not now ripe to enter into the kingdom. And will you proclaim the kingdom at Capernaum? Or are we to move on to Jerusalem? And when shall we learn, each of us, the positions we are to occupy with you in the establishment of the kingdom?" And Peter would have gone on asking further questions, but Jesus raised an admonitory hand and stopped him, and beckoning the other apostles standing nearby to join them. Jesus said, "My little children, how long shall I bear with you? Have I not made it plain to you that the kingdom is not of this world?" My kingdom, sorry. Made it plain to you that my kingdom is not of this world. I have told you many times that I have not come to sit on David's throne. And now how is it that you are inquiring which place each of you will occupy in the Father's kingdom? Can you not perceive that I have called you as ambassadors of a spiritual kingdom? Do you not understand that soon, very soon, you are to represent me in the world and in the proclamation of the kingdom, even as I now represent my Father who is in heaven? Can it be that I have chosen you and instructed you as messengers of the kingdom, and yet you do not comprehend the nature and significance of this coming kingdom of divine preeminence in the hearts of men? My friends, hear me once more. Banish your minds this idea that my kingdom is a rule of power or a reign of glory. Indeed, all power in heaven and on earth will presently be given into my hands. But it is not the Father's will that we use this divine endowment to glorify ourselves during this age. In another age, you shall indeed sit with me in power and glory, but it behooves us now to submit to the will of the Father and to go forth in humble obedience to execute his bidding on earth. Once more were his associates shocked, stunned. Jesus sent them away two and two to pray, asking them to return to him at noontime. On this crucial forenoon, they each sought to find God, and each endeavored to cheer and strengthen the other, and they returned to Jesus as he had bidden them. Jesus now recounted for them the coming of John, the baptism in Jordan, the marriage feast at Cana, the recent choosing of the 6, and the withdrawal from them of his own brothers in the flesh, and warned them that the enemy of the kingdom would seek also to draw them away. After this short but earnest talk with the apostles, all rose under Peter's leadership to declare their undying devotion to their master and to pledge their unswerving loyalty to the kingdom. As Thomas expressed it, to this coming kingdom, no matter what it is, even if I do not fully understand it, they all truly believed in Jesus, even though they did not fully comprehend his teachings. Near the middle of August, in the year AD 27, they went forth to, it's 26. I wrote that wrong earlier. Anyways, it's AD 26 right now. They went forth 2 and 2 to the fields of the work assigned by Andrew. The first 2 weeks just went out with Andrew and Peter. The second 2 weeks with James and John, and so on with the other couples in the order of their choosing. In this way, he was able to go out at least once with each couple before he called them together for the beginning of their public ministry. Jesus taught them to preach the forgiveness of sin through faith in God, without penance or sacrifice, and that the Father in heaven loves all of his children with the same eternal love. He enjoined his apostles to refrain from discussing 1, the work and imprisonment of John the Baptist. 2, the voice of the baptism, said Jesus. Only those who heard the voice may refer to it. Speak only that which you have heard from me. Speak not hearsay. 3, the turning of the water into wine at Cana. Jesus seriously charged him, saying, tell no man about the water and the wine. They had wonderful times throughout these 5 or 6 months, during which they worked as fishermen every alternate 2 weeks, thereby earning enough money to support themselves in the field for each succeeding 2 weeks of missionary work for the kingdom. The common people marveled at the teaching and ministry of Jesus and his apostles. The rabbis had long taught the Jews that the ignorant could not be pious or righteous, but Jesus' apostles were both pious and righteous. Yet they were cheerfully ignorant of much of the learning of the rabbis and the wisdom of the world. Jesus made plain to his apostles the difference between the repentance of so-called good works as taught by the Jews and the change of mind by faith, the new birth, which he required as the price of admission to the kingdom. He taught his apostles that faith was the only requisite to entering the Father's kingdom. John, on the other hand, had taught them repentance, to flee from the wrath to come. Now, I didn't make a video on his childhood. Maybe I'll circle back around to do that. But he grew up in a household with Jewish parents that were constantly talking about the wrath of God to come. And this caused many arguments between Jesus and his parents. I'll just leave it at that. Because God, his Father, has no wrath. Jesus, his Father, our Creator, source creator, is in us, and he has zero wrath. Jesus taught faith as the open door for entering into the present, perfect, and eternal love of God. Jesus did not speak like a prophet, one who comes to declare the word of God. He seemed to speak of himself as one having authority. Jesus sought to divert their minds from miracle seeking to finding a real and personal experience and the satisfaction and assurance of the indwelling of God's Spirit of love. The apostles early learned that the Master had a profound respect and sympathetic regard for every human being he met. They were tremendously impressed by this uniform and unvarying consideration which he so consistently gave to all sorts of men, women, and children. He would pause in the midst of a profound discourse that he might go out into the road to speak good cheer to a passing woman laden with her burden of body and soul. He would interrupt a serious conference with his apostles to fraternize with an intruding child. Nothing ever seemed so important to Jesus as the individual human who chanced to be in his immediate presence. He was a master and a teacher, but he was more. He was also a friend, a neighbor, and an understanding comrade. Though Jesus' public teaching mainly consisted in parables and short discourses, he invariably taught his apostles by questions and answers. That was the most fun part for me, guys. The Q&A. Every single night, long hours into the night, the Q&As were endless. I learned so much about in the Q&A between Jesus and his apostles. Not, he wasn't with the public. He didn't do Q&A with the public or the rabbis or any of that. But my focus in this video series is really the Q&A, because the Bible doesn't give us that. So, and take that with what you will. You can call it blaspheme. That's fine. It's okay. Jesus understood how many people were calling him blasphemous in his timeline. So, you know, I'm Team Jesus all the way. So it's okay. Call me blasphemous. I'm fine with that. He would always pause to answer sincere questions during his later public discourses. The apostles were at first shocked by, but early became accustomed to, Jesus' treatment of women. He made it very clear to them that women were to be accorded equal rights with men in the kingdom. This was blaspheme in the days of Jesus. It was better to actually burn scripture than to allow a woman to look at it, scripture. That's how women were disregarded as basically non-humans. The apostles early organized themselves in the following manner. I'm trying to bend my knee. My knee is not working any longer, and I'm just taking a moment here to try and get my shoe off. The apostles early organized themselves in the following manner. 1. Andrew, the first chosen apostle, was designated chairman and director general of the 12. Peter, James, and John were appointed personal companions of Jesus. They were to attend him day and night, to minister to his physical and sundry needs, and to accompany him on those night vigils of prayer and mysterious communion with the Father in heaven. Philip was made steward of the group. It was his duty to provide food and to see that visitors and even the multitude of listeners at times had something to eat. Nathanael watched over the needs of the families of the 12. He received regular reports as to the requirements of each apostle's family, and making a requisition on Judas, the treasurer, would send funds each week to those in need. Matthew was the fiscal agent of the apostolic corps. It was his duty to see that the budget was balanced, the treasury replenished. If the funds for mutual support were not forthcoming, if donations sufficient to maintain the party were not received, Matthew was empowered to order the 12 back to their nets for a season, but this was never necessary after they began their public work. He always had sufficient funds in the treasurer's hands to finance their activities. Thomas was manager of the itinerary. It devolved upon him to arrange lodgings and in the general way select places for teaching and preaching, thereby ensuring a smooth and expeditious travel schedule. James and Judas, the twin sons of Alphaeus, were assigned to the management of the multitudes. It was their task to deputize a sufficient number of assistant ushers to enable them to maintain order among the crowds during the preaching. Simon Zelotes was given charge of recreation and play. He managed the Wednesday programs and also sought to provide for a few hours of relaxation and diversion each day. Judas Iscariot was appointed treasurer. He carried the bag. He paid all the expenses and kept the books. He made budget estimates for Matthew from week to week and also made weekly reports to Andrew. Judas paid out funds on Andrew's authorization. In this way, the 12 functioned from their early organization up to the time of the reorganization made necessary by the desertion of Judas the betrayer. The Master and his disciple apostles went on in this simple manner until Sunday, January 12th, AD 27. So now we're back into 27. So earlier in the video, I think I said 27. I meant to say 26. Anyway. So when he called them together and formally ordained them as ambassadors of the kingdom and preachers of its glad tidings, and soon thereafter, they prepared to start for Jerusalem and Judea on their first public preaching tour. It is an eloquent testimony to the charm and righteousness of Jesus' earth life that, although he repeatedly dashed to pieces the hopes of his apostles and tore to shreds their every ambition for personal exaltation, only one deserted him. The apostles learned from Jesus about the kingdom of heaven, and Jesus learned much from them about the kingdom of men, human nature as it lives on earth, and on the other evolutionary worlds of time and space. These 12 men represented many different types of human temperament, and they had not been made alike by schooling. Many of these Galilean fishermen carried heavy strains of Gentile blood as a result of the forcible conversion of the Gentile population of Galilee 100 years previously. Do not make the mistake of regarding the apostles as being altogether ignorant and unlearned. All of them, except the Alphaeus twins, were graduates of synagogue schools, having been thoroughly trained in Hebrew scriptures and in much of the current knowledge of that day. 7 were graduates of the Capernaum synagogue schools, and there were no better Jewish schools in all of Galilee. When your records refer to these messengers of the kingdom as being ignorant and unlearned, it was intended to convey the idea that they were laymen, unlearned in the lore of the rabbis and untrained in the methods of rabbinical interpretation of the scriptures. They were lacking in so-called higher education. In modern times, they would certainly be considered uneducated, in some circles of society, even uncultured. One thing is certain, they had not all been put through the same rigid and stereotype educational curriculum from adolescence on. They had enjoyed separate experiences of learning how to live. Side note, the next 12 chapters is a recording of each way the apostles preached. First, their sermons, I read all of them, and here is a summary of each of them. So I can only, it is a long read. I can't tell you how many hours it takes to read all of this stuff, but I can only summarize it just to give you a small little breakdown. Starting with Andrew. Andrew was 33, the oldest and 1 year older than the oldest, and 1 year older than Jesus. Andrew was a man of clear insight, logical thought, and firm decision, whose great strength of character consisted in his superb stability. His temperamental handicap was his lack of enthusiasm. He many times failed to encourage his associates by judicious commendation, and this reticence to praise the worthy accomplishments of his friends grew out of his abhorrence of flattery and insincerity. Andrew was one of those all-round, even-tempered, self-made, and successful men of modest affairs. When the later persecutions finally scattered the apostles from Jerusalem, Andrew journeyed through Armenia, Asia Minor, and Macedonia, and after bringing many thousands into the kingdom, was finally apprehended and crucified in Petraea in Achaia. It was 2 full days before this robust man expired on the cross, and throughout these tragic hours, he continued effectively to proclaim the glad tidings of the salvation of the kingdom of heaven. So what I'm giving you is a little breakdown of who they were as people and also the end of their ministry, because everybody's ministry ended pretty quickly, at least for the 12. For the 12, their ministry didn't last long, ended pretty quickly after the resurrection. Next is Simon Peter. Simon Peter was 30. Peter was a fluent speaker, eloquent and dramatic. He was also natural and an inspirational leader of men, a quick thinker but not a deep reasoner. He asked many questions, more than all of the apostles put together, and while the majority of these questions were good and relevant, many of them were thoughtless and foolish. Peter did not have a deep mind, but he knew his mind fairly well. He was therefore a man of quick decision and sudden action. While others talked in their astonishment at seeing Jesus on the beach, Peter jumped in and swam ashore to meet the master. But Peter persisted in making the mistake of trying to convince the Jews that Jesus was, after all, really and truly the Jewish Messiah. right up to the day of his death. Simon Peter continued to suffer confusion in his mind between the concepts of Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, Christ as the world's Redeemer, and the Son of Man as the revelation of God, the loving Father of all mankind. Peter's wife was a very able woman. For years she labored acceptably as a member of the woman corps. That's 12 female disciples. We'll get to that much later. The woman corps, and when Peter was driven out of Jerusalem, she accompanied him upon all of his journeys to the churches as well as on all of his missionary excursions. And the day her illustrious husband yielded up his life, she was thrown to the wild beast in the arena at Rome. And so this man Peter, an intimate of Jesus, one of the inner circle, went forth from Jerusalem proclaiming the glad tidings of the kingdom with power and glory until the fullness of his ministry had been accomplished, and regarded himself as the recipient of high honors. With his captors informed him that he must die as his master died on the cross. And thus Simon Peter was crucified in Rome, and as we all know, upside down. James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Jesus' nickname, the James and John, the sons of thunder. James Zebedee was a well-balanced thinker and planner along with Andrew. He was one of the more level-headed of the apostolic group. He was a vigorous individual but was never in a hurry. He was an excellent balance wheel for Peter. He was modest and undramatic, a daily server, an unpretentious worker seeking no especial reward when he once grasped something of the real meaning of the kingdom. And even in the story about the mother of James and John, who asked that her sons be granted places on the right hand and the left hand of Jesus. It should be remembered that it was the mother who made this request, and when they signified that they were ready to assume such responsibilities, it should be recognized that they were cognizant of the dangers of accompanying the master's supposed revolt against the Roman power, and what they were also willing to pay the price. When Jesus asked if they were ready to drink the cup, they replied that they were. And as concerns James, it was literally true. He did drink the cup with the master, seeing that he was the first of the apostles to experience martyrdom, being early put to death with the sword by Herod Agrippa. James was thus the first of the 12 to sacrifice his life upon the new battle line of the kingdom. Herod Agrippa feared James above all of the other apostles. He was indeed often quiet and silent, but he was brave and determined when his convictions were aroused and challenged. James lived his life to the full, and when the end came, he bore himself with such grace and fortitude that even his accuser and informer, who attended his trial and execution, was so touched that he rushed away from the scene of James' death to join himself to become a disciple of Jesus. John Zebedee, 24, the youngest of the 12. John was in prison several times and was banished to the Isle of Patmos. Yes, this is John the Revelator, guys. For a period of 4 years until another emperor came to power in Rome. Had not John been tactful and sagacious, a sage, let's put it that way, he would undoubtedly have been killed, as was his more outspoken brother James. As the years passed, John, together with James, the Lord's brother, learned to practice wise conciliation when they appeared before civil magistrates. They found that a soft answer turns away wrath. They also learned to represent the church as a spiritual brotherhood devoted to the social service of mankind, rather than as the kingdom of heaven. They taught loving service rather than ruling power, kingdom, and king. When in temporary exile on Patmos, John wrote the book of Revelation, which you now have in greatly abridged and distorted form. The book of Revelation contains the surviving fragments of a great revelation, large portions of it which were lost. Other portions of it were removed. Subsequent to John's writing, it is preserved in only fragmentary and adulterated form. John traveled much, labored incessantly, and after becoming a bishop of the aged churches, settled down at Ephesus. He directed his associate Nathan in the writing of the so-called Gospel according to John at Ephesus when he was 99 years old. Of all of the 12 apostles, John Zebedee eventually became the outstanding theologian. He died a natural death at Ephesus in AD 103 when he was 101 years of age. Philip, the fifth chosen apostle, is 27 when chosen. Philip went on through the trying times of the Master's death, participated in the reorganization of the 12, and was the first to go forth to win souls for the kingdom outside of the immediate Jewish ranks, being most successful in his work for the Samaritans and all of his subsequent labors in behalf of the gospel. Philip's wife, who was an efficient member of the Women's Corps, became actively associated with her husband and his evangelistic work after their flight from the Jerusalem persecutions. His wife was a fearless woman. She stood at the foot of Philip's cross, encouraging him to proclaim the glad tidings even to his murderers. And when his strength failed, she began the recital of the story of salvation by faith in Jesus, and was silenced only when the irate Jews rushed upon her and stoned her to death. Their eldest daughter, Leah, continued their work later on becoming the renowned prophetess of Hierapolis. Wow, that's a tongue twister. Philip, the one-time steward of the 12, was a mighty man in the kingdom, winning souls wherever he went, and he was finally crucified for his faith and buried at Hierapolis. Nathanael, the sixth apostle chosen by Jesus. He was 25. Many times when Jesus was away on the mountain with Peter, James, and John, and things were becoming tense and tangled among the apostles, when even Andrew was in doubt about what to say to his disconsolate brethren, Nathanael would relieve the tension by a bit of philosophy or a flash of humor, good humor too. Nathanael's duty was to look after the families of the 12. He was often absent from the apostolic councils, for when he heard that sickness or anything out of the ordinary had happened to one of his charges, he lost no time in getting to that home. The 12 rested securely in the knowledge that their family's welfare was safe in the hands of Nathanael. Nathanael most revered Jesus for his tolerance. He never grew weary of contemplating the broad-mindedness and generous sympathy of the Son of Man. Nathanael's father, Bartholomew, died shortly after Pentecost, after which this apostle went into Mesopotamia and India, proclaiming the glad tidings of the kingdom and baptizing believers. His brethren never knew what became of their one-time philosopher, poet, and humorist, but he also was a great man in the kingdom and did much to spread his master's teachings. Even though he did not participate in the organization of the subsequent Christian church, Nathanael died in India. Matthew, the seventh apostle chosen by Andrew. Side note, Jesus only chose the 6 apostles, and those 6 chose the next 6. Matthew was 31 at the time of being chose. He was married and had 4 children. It was the Master's forgiving disposition which Matthew most appreciated. He would never cease to recount that faith only was necessary in the business of finding God. He always liked to speak of the kingdom as the business of finding God. Matthew really was a shrewd politician, but he was intensely loyal to Jesus and supremely devoted to the task of seeing that the messengers of the coming kingdom were adequately financed. The presence of Matthew among the 12 was the means of keeping the doors of the kingdom wide open to the host of the downhearted and outcast souls who had regarded themselves as long since without the bounds of religious consolation. Outcasts and despairing men and women flocked to hear Jesus, and he never turned one away. Levi, sometimes Jesus actually calls Matthew Levi. Levi did so wish that Jesus might know that much of the money came from his pocket. He little realized that the Master knew all about it. The apostles all died without knowing that Matthew was their benefactor to such an extent that when he went forth to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom after the beginning of the persecution, he was practically penniless. When these persecutions caused the believers to forsake Jerusalem, Matthew journeyed north, preaching the gospel of the kingdom and baptizing believers. He was lost to the knowledge of his former apostolic associates, but on the losing my place here. But on the knowledge, on the preaching and baptizing through Syria, Cappadocia, Galatia, Bithynia, and Thrace. And it was in Thrace at these words, Lysimachia, that certain unbelieving Jews conspired with the Roman soldiers to encompass his death. And this regenerated publican died triumphant in the faith of salvation he had so surely learned from the teachings of the Master during his recent sojourn on earth. Thomas, the eighth apostle chosen by Philip. He was 29, married with 4 children. Thomas's great strength was his superb analytical mind, coupled with his unflinching courage. When he had once made up his mind, his great weakness was his suspicious doubting, which he never fully overcame throughout his whole lifetime in the flesh. Jesus enjoyed Thomas very much and had many long personal talks with him. His presence among the apostles was a great comfort to all honest doubters and encouraged many troubled minds to come into the kingdom, even if they could not wholly understand everything about the spiritual and philosophic phases of the teachings of Jesus. Thomas's membership in the 12 was a standing declaration that Jesus loved even the honest doubters. He gave wise counsel to the apostles after Pentecost, and when persecution scattered the believers, he went to Cyprus, Crete, and North African coast and Sicily, preaching the glad tidings of the kingdom and baptizing believers. Thomas continued preaching and baptizing until he was apprehended by the agents of Rome government and was put to death in Malta. Just weeks before his death, he had begun the writing of the life and teachings of Jesus. I've already done a video on all of Thomas's writings, on all of Jesus's personal teachings to him. James and Judas, 9 and 10, chosen apostles by James and John Zebedee. They were 26, married with children. James Alphaeus especially loved Jesus because of the Master's simplicity. These twins could not comprehend the mind of Jesus, but they did grasp the sympathetic bond between themselves and the heart of their Master. Their minds were not of high order. They might even reverently be called stupid, but they had a real experience in their spiritual natures. They believed in Jesus. They were sons of God and fellows of the kingdom. Judas Alphaeus was drawn toward Jesus because of the Master's unostentatious humility. Such humility linked with such personal dignity made a great appeal to Judas. The fact that Jesus would always enjoin silence regarding his unusual acts made a great impression on the simple child of nature. They returned to their families in nets. Their work was done. They had not the ability to go on more complex battles of the kingdom, but they lived and died conscious of having been honored and blessed with 4 years of close and personal association with the Son of God, the sovereign maker of the universe. Simon Zelotes, the 11th apostle chosen by Simon Peter, was 28 when he joined the apostles. The one thing about Jesus which Simon so much admired was the Master's calmness, his assurance, poise, and inexplicable composure. Although Simon was a rabid revolutionist, a fearless firebrand of agitation, he gradually subdued his fiery nature until he became a powerful and effective preacher of peace on earth and goodwill among men. Simon was a great debater. He did like to argue, and when it came to dealing with the legalistic minds of the educated Jews or the intellectual quibblings of the Greeks, the task was always assigned to Simon. I can't tell you how much I read on this intellectual, legalistic mind of the Jews, and especially when it got to the Greeks. Oh my goodness. I'm not even including any of the videos because it's not really about Jesus. It's just the frivolous intellect of man. It was just, I had to skip over most of it because it's like, oh, humans, like literally, it's like humans being humans. Back to Joshua's words. He was a rebel by nature. We're still talking about Simon Zelotes. He was rebel by nature and an iconoclast by training. I don't even know what that means. Iconoclast by training. But Jesus won him for the higher concepts of the kingdom of heaven. He had always identified himself with the party of protest, but he now joined the party of progress, unlimited and eternal progression of spirit and truth. Simon was a man of intense loyalties, warm personal devotions, and he did profoundly love Jesus. Jesus was not afraid to identify himself with businessmen, laboring men, optimists, pessimists, philosophers, skeptics, publicans, politicians, and patriots. The master had many talks with Simon, but he never fully succeeded in making an internationalist out of his ardent Jewish nationalists. Jesus often told Simon that it was proper to want to see the social, economic, and political orders improved, but he would always add that it is not the business of the kingdom of heaven. We must be dedicated to doing of the Father's will. Simon went to Alexandria, and after working up the Nile, penetrated into the heart of Africa, everywhere, preaching the gospel of Jesus and baptizing believers. He labored until he was an old man and feeble, and he died and was buried in the heart of Africa. The last is Judas Iscariot, chosen by Nathanael. He was 30 and unmarried. By following Jesus, he was disowned by his parents, who were Sadducees. To Jesus, Judas was a faith adventure. From the beginning, the master fully understood the weakness of his apostle and well knew the dangers of admitting him into fellowship. But it is the nature of the sons of God to give every created being a full and equal chance for salvation and survival. Jesus wanted not only the mortals of this world, but the onlookers of innumerable other worlds. You're going to see that a lot, guys. Jesus talks about other creatures and not of this fold and other worlds a lot. So I'm just saying, the blue spectrum of the sun is headed this way. You're going to see that. Innumerable other worlds to know that when doubt exists as the sincerity of the wholeheartedness of a creature's devotion to the kingdom, it is an invariable practice of the judges of men to fully receive the doubtful candidate. The door of eternal life is wide open to all. Whosoever will may come. There are no restrictions or qualifications save the faith of the one who comes. During the outworking of his anger-conceived plans of traitorous betrayal, he experienced moments of regret and shame. And in these lucid intervals, he faint-heartedly conceived, as a defense of his own mind, the idea that Jesus might possibly exert his power and deliver himself at the last moment. When the sordid and sinful business was all over, this renegade mortal who thought lightly of selling his friend for 30 pieces of silver, again, this is Judas, to satisfy his long-nursed craving for revenge, rushed out and committed the final act in the drama of fleeing from the realities of mortal existence, suicide. The 11 apostles were horrified and stunned. Jesus regarded the betrayer only with pity. The worlds have found it difficult to forgive Judas, and his name has become eschewed throughout a far-flung universe. So that's the end of the 6 beginning teaching. 6 became 12. But also far-flung universe. Every time Jesus uses the word universe, it's always far-flung. Just saying, Anita K. Owens, put her out.